Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Masira webinar on AI in education. Is it cheating? My name is Luke Harris, and I'm a media officer here with the Media Centre for Education Research Australia. Before we do begin today, in the spirit of reconciliation, Masira does acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. For myself, that is those of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and that we pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. The advent and adoption of artificial intelligence since the turn of the decade continued to grow at a phenomenal pace, with AI tools for just about anything to assist us in our daily life. However, the usage of generative AI technologies in learning-based scenarios, such as schools, continues to be quite a conscientious issue. On one hand, AI does have the capacity to further enhance our knowledge and capabilities to complete tasks beyond our learning comprehension, similar to technological feats such as the internet or the calculator before it. On the other hand, though, the use of AI in schools and universities might be seen as a form of cheating, where the work produced by generative AI is not always reflective of a student's academic skill. So, where do we draw the line between assistance and cheating? What are the most moral, ethical, and responsible ways in which AI should be harnessed? Should AI be harnessed? And how do we prepare students for a world where working alongside AI is not only encouraged, but expected? Today, we're speaking on these topics. We have brought together some leading experts in artificial intelligence and education to kind of disseminate and the uses of tools such as ChatGPT in learning environments. Our first speaker today is Professor Matt Bower from Macquarie University. Professor Bower's extensive research covers how contemporary technologies such as AI can be most effectively used to support cognitive development and collaborative learning. He'll be speaking on the utilization of generative AI in primary and secondary schooling scenarios, and how its use can be scaffolded by teachers for suitable usage in the classroom. Following Professor Bower, we have Professor Philip Dawson, co-director of the Centre for Research in Assessment and Digital Learning at Deakin University. Bringing his background in assessment in higher education, Professor Dawson will be speaking on the usage of AI in tertiary education and helping to define where the line should be drawn between cheating and assistance. Each speaker will have around 6 to 8 minutes of presentation time, followed by a short Q&A at the end of the webinar. Now, if any of you in the chat would like to ask any questions during this webinar, please be sure to post the questions that you may have either during or after these speeches in the chat box, and we'll ask them at the end of the webinar. Without any further ado, I'll hand over to Professor Bower.
Thank you so much. And can I just confirm, are you able to see that screen?
Yep, I can see that all fine. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so look, it's a real privilege to be able to speak with you about what is, I believe, a really fascinating topic that really has resonated right throughout the educational sector. With early prognostications about how much labor would be replaced by generative AI and AI in general, sort of around 25% of work across a range of industries. And to that point, I guess we need to be mindful that the students that we teach now are going to be expected to utilize this. And so the idea that, we'll just try and ban it under all circumstances in education really isn't setting them or Australia up for success. So I wanted to also point out that it's not just ChatGPT. A lot of people sort of think that AI is just ChatGPT and that they're synonyms, but it's far from the case. There are many other generative AI tools that we can access. And I'm just, my slides seem a little bit stuck there. Hang on. So here are some of the other tools that we can use that are text-based. Copilot from Microsoft, Gemini from Google, Claude from Anthropic. Perplexity is a bit more of a research-oriented one. Poe has a dashboard of all. And it's not just text either, that there's image generation. So when we're setting assignments for students, we need to be aware that they can actually create any image that they'd like to describe. And the quality of this is getting better and better over time. So the left two images here, when just based on a text prompt of a 3D render of a happy teacher teaching a class of happy kids, organized a modern classroom of technology. About a year ago, the two images on the left side were produced. about sort of 6 months ago, the middle two images, and in the last couple of weeks, those latter two images. So the pace of development of this technology is also quite extraordinary. So we start to project out sort of 5 years. What are our students going to be able to do with this technology? And there are other, it's not just DALL-E, which was used to create those. There's a number of these tools: Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, Adobe Firefly, Night Cafe, or others. There's AI music generation, so you can put in the sort of music that you want. So music teachers now need to be aware that these tools exist for music. And even if you want to create a presentation or a document or a web page. So this is a tool called Gamma App. And let's say you want a presentation, or you set your high school class or primary school class an assignment. You just type in what you want the assignment to be about. It will then generate a list of bullet points for you. You can change that, or if you want to just accept it and continue, it will give you some themes to pick between, so you can look, have the aesthetic look and feel that you like. It does some quick thinking, and then it will create, and this is in real time, it will create a presentation that is online, and you can edit any part of that presentation. But also, if you're interested in submitting this as, for instance, as your homework assignment, then all you need to do is go to the top right-hand corner and click Export to PDF or PowerPoint. And that's any task that a teacher might want to set done within a period of, just 60 seconds, if the student isn't prepared or doesn't add any value. So we really need to think about what sort of value and how we contextualize learning and teaching and assessment tasks based on the information around us, the context that we teach in. There are video presentation tools, FlexClip. I've got a video demonstration that, with more time, I'd show you. But basically, you can put in the content on the left-hand side, a text request for a video, and it will create all the transitions, all of the captions, and enable students to quite easily complete video tasks. So one of the first things that my colleagues and I did in response to this was to see what teachers thought about how to change teaching and assessment in response to these increasingly powerful generative AI tools. This article is available open access, should you want to refer to it. And essentially what we found is, at the time that we collected the data, most educators were in this briefly tried category of generative AI tool use. They thought that it was going to have a major to profound effect on how they needed to assess. And here are the sorts of things they were saying about how they needed to change their assessment in light of generative AI. So they were talking about, we need to have more sort of exams and spoken tasks, pen and paper tasks, video production, visual essays, portfolio tasks. We also need to change the content of our assessments to emphasize higher order thinking, authentic tasks, focusing on the process, personal reflection and personalization, and also referencing and citing is incredibly important, so that we understand where students have derived their information from. The conditions of assessment that we really need to make sure that we invigilate some of at least of the face-to-face and assessment and in-class assignments instead of homework assignments. Now, that's not to say that we can never have homework assignments anymore, but I think it does change the relative balance and how we look at those tasks as maybe being more formative than summative assessments. Quickly, some other research that might be interesting. This idea that business consultants who were able to use generative AI were 12%, complete 12% more tasks, 25% faster, and produce 40% higher quality results. That is to say, in the future, there is going to be no bosses that tell their employees not to use generative AI. We need to equip our students with an understanding about how to use this and how to use this really well. They talk about a jagged technological frontier where some tasks are easily done by AI and some tasks are just unable to be done at this point by AI. And it's really important that as educators, we understand the difference. So as an example, computing teachers need to know that if they give their students a simple task like write a computer program in Python that allows users to enter a number and the program returns the first n prime numbers, that generative AI does that sort of task perfectly and immediately. On the other hand, there are simple things that we can ask generative AI to do, like draw a diagram of where the adenoids are. And it comes up with a diagram that unless you scratch the surface, you might think, oh, well, that looks pretty good. But actually, it talks about the ampacacity, the suale, the varote, and all other sorts of fictitious body parts. The adenoids are down near where the jugular is located. But when you check it out, it's actually entirely fictitious. So we need to understand that there are some parts and tasks that generative AI can't yet do, and those might be areas where we can still reliably assess students. In terms of AI assistance, this was one interesting study that might be of interest to you in terms of how much of a boost students were getting and different sorts of students were getting from the use of generative AI. So in the first time that some legal studies students were asked to do an assessment task, they actually were ranked from 0 to 100. And in the second task, where they were allowed to use generative AI because they weren't allowed to use it in the first task, the bottom quartile of students received quite a big boost. The second quartile of students received a smaller boost. The third quartile, smaller again. The top quartile of students actually performance went down. So we need to be aware that when we're assessing, if we're going to use generative AI, that it's those bottom quartile or the lower performing students who will typically get the biggest boost. We also need to be aware about creativity, that creativity is, which we previously thought was in the domain of just, people, that generative AI is getting better and better at creativity tasks. But what the research in this graph also shows is that students or people acting without generative AI are more and more outperformed by generative AI, but that humans and technology working together get the best results. So in terms of further thoughts, we need to be guided by an important reference as the Australian Framework for Generative AI in Schools, which provides guidance on a number of dimensions. But the sort of guidance it provides around academic integrity doesn't really specify what schools should be doing. It sort of says that they should be supported to use generative AI ethically in schoolwork by ensuring appropriate attribution. However, there's a lot more work that needs to happen. That work often involves specifying whether or not students are able to use generative AI, for instance, using a traffic light systems, and some tasks where we need to check that students have that information on board, that they've learnt it and it's in their brain. We may say, just like with calculators and spell checkers, you need to do it without the technology, without the generative AI. But there are other more authentic tasks where entire use may be permitted. The detection tools have been largely debunked. In fact, unless a student doesn't try at all to hide the fact that they've used generative AI, they can easily get around these sorts of Turnitin and AI cheat check and AI text classifier tools. So we need to be aware that that's not sufficient safeguarding. These tools, though, are going to increasingly have generative AI built into them. So platforms like Khan Academy have their Khan MeGo, where it uses a different sort of approach where students, it's sort of more Socratic. Students are asked questions in response to their questions and given hints rather than the answers. And I think in the future, if we want to work as teachers to prepare students for to optimize their learning, we need to help them to use all generative AI and artificial intelligence as learning machines rather than answer machines. We need to develop their AI capabilities. UNESCO has a framework for that, that's under development. So that just as we've spoken about digital literacies in previous years, it's all about AI literacies now. So in sum, and I'm sorry if I've gone a little bit over time, the main risk is that students won't learn, but banning it's futile. There are really great opportunities for students to derive educational benefits. They're still going to need to know all the basic knowledge and skills, but we just need to clearly distinguish those tasks where students cannot use AI and then assess them as such, because we need to check it's in that brain. And for more authentic tasks where they can use AI, those are the ones we can set for homework. We need to shift towards ethics, empathy, enterprise, and engagement, and increasingly continue to focus on not lower order thinking, but critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication. And I see this as a wonderful catalyst for positive pedagogical change rather than a threat. So sorry I've gone over time, and I'll stop my share and hand over to Philip.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt. And I think the stuff I'm going to say really builds on what you've said. I would agree with all of what you've said. I'm just going to share some slides myself. Okay. And yes, I'm Phil. I'm from Cradle at Deakin University. We research assessment in higher education in a digital learning context. I remember when I was younger, my grandfather telling me, why are you studying this AI degree? That's going to be totally useless. There's no point to it. You need to have something else, another string in your bow. So eventually that string in my bow has been educational assessment. I've done a lot of work on cheating over the past decade, and now we see the kind of connection between all these bits. So I'm really going to focus in on this. Is it cheating, AI in education? And I thought I'd try to, rather do it myself, I thought I'd do the let's get ChatGPT to do it. And then rather than say it myself, I thought, let's get not ChatGPT, let's get 11 Labs voice model to say it. So here's not me saying, not my own words. AI in education isn't inherently cheating. It's about how it's used. When AI aids learning and provides personalized feedback, it's beneficial. However, using AI to bypass the learning process is unethical. Clear guidelines and ethical awareness are crucial to ensure AI enhances education without compromising academic integrity. Yeah, I think that's okay. I'm not sure that would fool my parents into believing it was me. It'd probably fool the bank into believing it was me. So this is, to be clear, words I didn't make up, said by a voice model that's trained on a few minutes of me giving webinars. It's very much my webinar voice, and it makes me really aware that I might have a real Australian rising inflection thing. I don't know if anyone caught in the sentences end thing. So yeah, look, that's what ChatGPT thought I would say. But what do I actually think? Well, in one word, is AI in education cheating? Sometimes. And that's an incredibly unsatisfying response. So let's go a little bit deeper. In a sentence, it depends. Cheating is socially constructed. It's a made-up thing. Cheating is not some absolute that exists out there in the world that we can go and observe with a microscope or measure. We decide what cheating is in a particular context at a particular point in time. And in my book, which is over there on the left, a thing I say is that if you were to go back and look at a lot of Australian university academics' undergraduate work, you would find what we now regard to be cheating in their undergraduate work. I'm pretty sure, because a lot of us went through before the days of text matching tools. We would have committed the heinous sins of copy-paste plagiarism, and the machinery wasn't there to alert us to that and to tell us and catch us out for it and all that. Our understandings of what cheating is change over time. We make it up. We decide. So what should we decide? Well, to decide what is cheating and what's not, it's really useful to think, well, why do we care about it? There's three main arguments in the research literature about why we should care about cheating. The first one is morality. Yeah, cheating is wrong. I mean, Fair enough. But we've already identified a real relativism, a real cheating's defined at a particular point in time issue. So the morality does matter. That's not where I tend to live with regard to cheating. Some people say cheating's wrong because it impacts on learning. If students cheat, then their learning will be worse. The challenge is we don't penalize students for a whole bunch of other things that impact negatively on their learning. We don't say to students, you can't have a part-time job because it will impact on your learning. You can't have a romantic partner because that might impact negatively on your learning. You can't take up a hobby because that'll hurt your learning. So for some reason, we've identified cheating's impacts on learning as being particularly problematic, but that's not the one that appeals to me the most. The third reason for why cheating's wrong does appeal to me a lot. It's around assessing and assuring learning. So I'm in higher ed. In higher ed, we're governed by the Higher Education Standards Framework, and it says if we as a university let someone across that graduation stage and they have not met the course learning outcomes, the thing we say they should be able to do by the end of the degree, they cross that graduation stage and they can't do it, we are in breach. So I care a lot about cheating and then by extension, inappropriate AI use, because it gets in the way of us being able to do that. It gets in the way of us being able to say someone is capable of something and being really sure about that. It matters that we only graduate people who can do what we say they can do because they go out into the world and they do things that can cause harm to others. So this really does matter. This is high stakes. Now, look, I've used the word cheating a bit. Gee, cheating's a hard word to nail down and define exactly what it is. The best, but also least satisfying definitions of cheating that I see in the literature go along the lines of cheating is what happens when the rules against cheating are broken. There's weird tautology. So what might we set the rules to be? Well, we've done a little bit of work recently with the Tertiary Education Quality Standards Agency, TEQSA, and there's a big group of us led by Jason Lodge down there. Some of the authors are. We came up with this guidance for the sector on how we might look at the use of AI and assessment. There's a lot in there. There's a lot to dive down into that I'm not going to look at. But I think these top two principles really sort of set out the likely future for us, and they connect really well with what Matt was saying. So firstly, we think assessment and learning experiences should equip students to participate ethically and actively in a society where AI is ubiquitous. AI is there. It has been there for quite some time. We need assessment to involve students in the use of AI because if it's not in assessment, it's not really there. There's a great quote about assessment by Paul Ramsden that is, from the student's perspective, the assessment defines the actual curriculum. If it's not in the assessment, it's not really there. The assessment is the real stuff, the real work of learning. So if we don't have AI in assessment, how are we to prepare students for this world where AI is ubiquitous? The second principle is that forming trustworthy judgments about student learning in a time of AI requires multiple, inclusive, and contextualized approaches to assessment. We do still need to make these trustworthy judgments about what students are capable of, and sometimes we want to see what they're capable of without AI. Not all of the time, but sometimes. There's a lot of other words in there about the things assessment needs to be. Would love to talk about any of those. There's been a mention of Danny Liu in the chat as well. Danny was one of the experts that we consulted with in producing this, and he's written a whole range of really, really useful resources. I think one of them's linked to in the chat there. So that's the TEQSA doc. This is some Phil talk here. I'm increasingly of the view that if you aren't supervising something, you can't be sure how AI was or wasn't used. If you don't see students do it or check in with them in some way, you can't be sure of that. Now, supervising can take a whole range of forms. It could be some sort of in-person written exam, the traditional approach. It could be something like having a chat with students about their work and really judging what they're capable of based on that chat. 20 years ago when I taught undergraduate computer science, we did that. That was how we marked. We'd just sit down with you and chat about your work. There's many different ways you can supervise or interact with people, but we need to move to that when assessment of learning is high stakes, when it really matters. Further from this, don't set restrictions that can't be enforced. I've written a bit about setting restrictions in assessment, and you can think you're making assessment more secure when you set restrictions, like this assessment is closed book. You can't use AI. You can feel like the assessment is more secure, but it's actually less secure because you have to start enforcing all these restrictions. And how the hell can you stop someone from using AI if you're not in the room? I honestly don't know how to do that. And I've read a lot, talked to a lot of people, tried a lot of things. Doing that, setting restrictions you can't enforce, hurts validity. It hurts your ability to assess what you mean to assess. So, secure some tasks. Might be through having a chat, might be through an exam, might be through process check-ins or placements, lots of different ways, and then accept that the others are going to see significant AI use, and it might even be a good thing. I'm going to give a plug to one last thing before I go. Something that becomes really, really important in this time of AI is something that we call evaluative judgment. Evaluative judgment is your ability to decide if something is of sufficient quality. It could be work you've produced, it could be work someone else has produced, it could be work you've gotten from AI. This becomes really important in a time of AI because we've got to know if AI is giving us garbage. Matt had a great example on there about the adenoids. That was garbage, but I didn't know it. I don't have sufficiently developed evaluative judgment in the context of pictures of anatomy stuff. This is the thing we really want to be developing in students. We want to re-examine what we can assess and what we should assess, and I think really privilege this evaluative judgment. So that's me. Is it cheating? Sometimes, maybe. Love to have a chat there.
Lovely. Well, I appreciate both of you guys talking on that one. Now, we do have a couple of questions to ask quickly. And likewise, if anyone does have any questions that they would like to ask these experts, please pop them in the chat and I'll be happy to ask them. Kate's actually asked a question right now. What should teachers in schools do right now to start addressing this? Is this something that should be addressed at the level of leadership at the separate schools? I think this might be a better question for Matt first. If Matt, if you'd like to answer that one.
Yeah, certainly. And I do get out to a lot of schools, and it is a really hot topic. And there isn't perfect consistency in how schools are broaching this. Some are actually leaping forward into embracing AI in a lot of their assessment tasks. Some are saying, no, it can't be used in any assessment tasks. There's a whole lot of policy revision that's going on in terms of, the assessment policy. I'm the chair of Macquarie University's Senate Learning and Teaching Committee. One of the interesting things when we were looking at our assessment policy is that actually, if you have the fundamentals around, appropriate acknowledgement of sources, academic integrity, shouldn't plagiarize, all of the ethics that underpin assessment, right, then really, in a way, the use of AI is just an instance of that. People have had the opportunity to source assistance from ghostwriters and other places where they're getting information and can do their assignments. The only thing really, in a way, that generative AI has done for those non-invigilated assignments is made it much more accessible, easily accessible to pretty much everyone. So really, I think it boils down to, as we had Philip indicate, we've got to be very clear that some assessments, you need to have it on board. And so we're assessing this in class and we're observing, we're supervising to understand that, yes, you have learnt it and you're not just using AI. And for those other tasks, I think we've just sort of got to open it up and make sure our assessment tasks are authentic and personalized, and all of those things that I showed in that slide around, making sure that it's contextualized and people are referencing properly. So there are ways that we need for those unsupervised assessment tasks that we need to, or we can try to make them more resilient to AI by adjusting the design in those sorts of ways.
And also, Alison has asked, how can or should institutions support teachers in developing the AI literacy we want from our students? And I think that goes into a bit of a question that I wanted to ask you as well, Matt, while I have you, is do you think that generative AI courses should be mandatory for all new teachers that are coming into the industry?
Yeah, so, and again, how we actually do this, each sort of teacher education program will handle it differently. Is it a specific course, or is it something that might be in a educational technology course, but actually might wash right through every single subject? Because, for instance, if you're learning, if you're becoming a history teacher, when you're doing your history methodology, you need to understand all of the issues, not only the potential downsides from and the academic integrity risks, but also the amazing upsides. As a history teacher, you can ask AI to be Winston Churchill and have students interview. So we're talking about assessment today, but I think all teacher education programs and have a massive responsibility to make sure that generative AI features right throughout their courses now.
Tyebs asked if you could please elaborate on how to implement or enforce evaluative judgments in class activities. Does anyone want to maybe take a go and answer that?
I might jump on that. So there's a whole bunch of different ways. Something I do in my teaching is when you submit a task to me, I get you to self-assess on a copy of a rubric. We've got to use rubrics in a lot of higher ed institutions. You self-assess, I assess on a separate copy of the rubric, and then I target my feedback on where our judgments differ. And it saves me a whole bunch of time in marking because I'm not telling you things you already know. I'm telling you things, you thought you were here, but actually you were here, and this is why I think that. So that's me trying to calibrate evaluative judgment. Another activity that people often do is they get students to get exemplars. Could be something you, the teacher, have prepared, could be something you get from AI, and then get students to do that work, really critiquing the output of AI or the exemplar or whatever, and say how it relates to the sort of standards of work we're trying to produce. Our centre's got a great open access paper led by Margaret Bierman. Hopefully someone on the chat can chuck it in there. Published a few weeks ago, and it really looks into how we can the sorts of things we can do in class to develop evaluative judgment in a time of AI.
Theo, I've got another one here for you. This is one of my own questions. With such advancements in AI, is this further kind of pushing the boundary of what we're going to be deeming acceptable as assessment? And further to that, does this make degrees potentially easier or harder to obtain? And does this make future graduates more or less informed than their predecessors?
I might jump on this one. My dream is that the standards of a graduate 5 years from now are significantly higher than the standards of a graduate 5 years ago in terms of what they can do, because we're looking at what they can do with AI, and we've done all these great adaptations to our courses. We're integrating AI, and they can just do so much more in the same way that someone graduating from an engineering degree now can do so much more than someone graduating with an engineering degree 30 years ago could. So I really hope that we get to there. I'm also really, really concerned. I'm worried that a lot of this is really hard change we don't have any easy answers for. At the moment, we're doing a study at Deakin where we are working with a lot of academics who believe that they're doing stuff in, addressing the sort of TEXA guidelines. We're trying to understand, does this stuff actually work? How can we improve it? How can we find examples of stuff that works? I think the fundamental thing of we're going to have a lot more chats with students about their work. Yeah, I just think that's where we've got to go to.
Lovely. Well, I think that's pretty much all the questions that we have, unless anyone else would like to ask anything before we wrap up today. I see Scott has posted the article on developing evaluative judgment for a time of generative artificial intelligence. So if you want to have a read of that, that's available on open access, I believe. Other than that, is there any final remarks that either of you would like to say before we wrap things up today?
Oh, look, I just thank you for the opportunity. It's been a really interesting discussion. Great questions coming through. I believe that, this is a challenging time, but, it's also an incredibly interesting time and one with immense opportunities. We've just got to really think carefully, though, about how we proceed to make sure that, we're using generative AI to enhance learning, not just sort of having students use it as an answer machine that they're copying and paste from. And if we do that, we might be able to reach Philip's ideal of, really improving learning rather than, in some way detrimenting it.
I might use my last words to address something Kate's just chucked in the chat about sort of people with learning challenges or neurodivergence, that sort of thing. I I really hope that we are able to make assessment a lot more inclusive and view a lot of these technologies as, a hyper assistive technology, something that we can really be able to see what students are really capable of, without some of the, you know, terrible structural barriers that they face in assessment at the moment.
Lovely. And one last question as well, if anyone can answer that from Yasser. Do you see that moving from what students should know in our curriculum to what they should do requires a review of the scale of classrooms, such as smaller classes compared to large lectures?
Well, I guess that depends on whether artificial intelligence is going to be doing the assessment or whether it's going to be humans. And I say that sort of half in jest, but half not, with some of the developments coming through with things like ChatGPT 4.0. That some people talking about artificial general intelligence, that we might reach that within the next sort of 5 years, where machines can do any sort of cognitive task and provide feedback that humans might. I don't think it's an unrealistic possibility. But I think always, we're going to need humans to be inspiring and working with and doing all the relational work with other humans. For that, I would always advocate for smaller class sizes so that people get more of an opportunity to form a stronger and deeper human connections.
I got to take the opportunity to jump on this one. I think large classes are often quite maligned because large class teaching is often used as a way to save money. You could do large class teaching in ways that aren't designed to save money. They're designed to enable you to be more efficient with some of the stuff that scales well so that you can do a lot of really good one-on-one stuff. In Australian higher ed, my context, we take about $10,000 a year from students. I think it's quite reasonable for them to expect to have a chat with someone one-on-one about their work a few times per semester. I think that's a totally okay thing. Class size, be what it be. We've got to find ways to do that.
Lovely. Well, that concludes our webinar today. So thank you once again, Professor Matt Boer from Macquarie University and Professor Philip Dawson from Deakin University.